All right, we have Joni on with us, but we're gonna have to get started here with some announcements first. So, welcome to WAY2B TV, where there is a better way to be than atheist or theist. We want your questions and comments. There are several ways to do this. First, callers can call 863-940-0047. Secondly, we have an active Twitter feed on screen throughout the broadcast. Just tweet hashtag WAY2B TV and the chat room is open. Hang on a minute. I'm having some technical difficulties. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. All right, sorry about that. Sometimes it's just hard to figure out. Anyway, the chat room is open. On a computer monitor, you should see the chat room to the right of your video stream. If you are watching full screen, you will not see the chat room. Also, Colleen wrote this week and said she was having trouble, that it was collapsing on her iPad, and it turns out all she has to do is touch the comment or refresh the chat, and it comes right back up. You can interact with us in between broadcasts by email at interact@way2b.org, and you can text the WAY to 22828 to receive our newsletter each Thursday morning. Depending on your phone plan, text fees may apply. Each newsletter will have a direct link to the broadcast. The newsletter also contains the discussion starter videos we will be using that same Thursday evening. Finally, to receive direct notices each time we upload a video, please subscribe to our WAY2B TV channel on YouTube. It would help us greatly. This information will appear on the screen again from time to time throughout our broadcast. We have Joni on with us today. Hello, Joni.
Good evening.
Let's see here. Over the past several months, even with our private broadcast to snowbirds, this link between Tennessee and Florida has been a nightmare. Although we do not have a perfect sound this evening, I think we have a stable sound. Joni and I have been married since we were teenagers, 45 years next month. We have 3 grown children and 7 grandchildren. We owned and operated an engineering firm together. We graduated from seminary together. We were on staff as pastor and music director together. And we hope to do this broadcast together. As many of my friends will tell you, talking is not a challenge to me. But for Joni, it's different. She eases into people. In other words, she's not as pushy as I am. So ask her some direct questions. I can assure you she has an opinion. She has always been an active and vital part of everything we've done. She is also in the chat room on her iPad. And so, Joni, no pressure here now. Have you got anything?
Right.
Have you got anything in mind that you would like to say before we get started?
Too much time talking about Joni.
Yes, I knew you'd feel that way.
Uh-huh.
I knew you would feel that way. But I'm glad she's there, and I'm glad we've got sound tonight. We've had to do some complicated things. We have to use 3 different venues in order to make her image and her audio work on the broadcast. And so let us know if you have audio problems, and let us know if you have video problems. We'd especially like to know how you feel about what you can hear from Joni. I think it's clear and you can hear it. I know I can hear it clearly here. but then what you hear there on the stream may be different. Last week, let's see here. Last week, we began developing a YouTube playlist entitled For Heaven's Sake. In a few weeks, we will, start on WAY2B religion, which is the next playlist. And then we'll move on to what Jesus had to say about after the practice of religion. Then we'll move on to develop the playlist, The WAY2B Recovering from Too Much Religion, otherwise known as the Sermon on the Mount. There was nothing supernatural about Jesus' kingdom of heaven. Jesus was teaching the people of the way, and as they came to be known. They were not Christians. He used a figure of speech 32 times and told 11 stories about the kingdom of heaven, how this kingdom inside compares to one's attitude. Now I want to ask you a question before we get started, before we go any further. I want to pose a question to you that you can contemplate before we get to our discussion time. But my question is simply this: if each major religion over the millenniums had made primary its own teachings on the development of inward character instead of focusing on supernatural dogma, would the world be a better place? If each major religion over the millenniums had made primary its own teachings on the development of the inward person, the inward character, instead of focusing on the supernatural, would the world be a better place? And I think that's a good question. This week we had some interaction from some folks, just like we did last week. And I picked one out to share with you guys. Sabotage, that's his handle. Sabotage 106 wrote, related to one of the videos that I posted this week. He said, "Good to know I don't actually have to believe in God to get to heaven. All I have to do is convince the whole world to love each other, and we can have heaven on earth." Of course, when put like that, I do find God to be more plausible. And so, as you can imagine, I wrote back and I said, "Sabotage 106, thanks for your comment. Actually, my view is that there is no heaven as religion uses the term to get to, except in a metaphorical sense. Rather, the way, in the contiguous line of thought of Jesus and others, is an attitude toward life. Likewise, one's findings, this way of being, has nothing to do with teaching anyone anything. It is a personal matter, never a matter of converting anyone from anything to anything. I just enjoy teaching the way. I do not believe in the supernatural. Trying to convert the world will not bring contentment. And while some might say they find contentment in railing against whole classes of people, I sincerely doubt it. This is why I say both atheist and theist can know, not get to, the kingdom of heaven. It's just a play on words that represents finding contentment via a changed attitude, not by changing people, circumstances, or the world around me." And that's my exchange with Sabotage 106. So I thought I would start out tonight. The best way to start out was, you might like to see the video that he responded to. What it is I remade, last week we had a really hard time because I talked too much, went too long, and tried to do it ad hoc, and it simply didn't come out right. And I couldn't even keep my own thoughts together like I needed to. So I got up the next morning and I began working on a video, a 7.5-minute video, not a 45-minute diatribe. But I worked on a 7.5-minute video, and it's what Sabotage 106 responded to when I uploaded it. That's what he was responding to. So I'm going to start that video right now and let you guys see what you think about it. It might help you answer the question, or at least develop some idea about the question. So let's go to the video. There are clearly three concepts of a coming kingdom in the ancient writings known as the Bible. One is what I call the contiguous line of thought of an ancient speaker named Jesus. He lived at the beginning of the first century. The second concept was held by many of Jesus' listeners. They believed in a coming kingdom on earth in which they would prosper greatly. The third concept, the one from where modern religion gets an afterlife with gates of pearl and golden streets, is inarguably the most esoteric of all the writings in the Bible. This writing, known as Revelation, was not written until the end of the first century. Obviously, our interest here is in the thoughts of the ancient speaker named Jesus. The epiphany in Jesus' figure of speech, kingdom of heaven, leaves little room for religion. In fact, the concept negated religion's role altogether. Jesus' view of the kingdom of heaven was for a different time and a different place than religious roots taught his listeners. The figure of speech, kingdom of heaven, was simply a rhetorical device to gain his listeners' attention. When Jesus began his speaking, he began by saying simply, "Change, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand." He taught his followers to teach the same, and as you go, teach, saying, "The kingdom of heaven is at hand." The speaker told his listeners, the kingdom of heaven is right here, within your reach. The long wait is over. You have your kingdom. Consider that the change to which Jesus refers is a changed attitude toward the concept of God and toward one another. The change he promoted throughout his speaking. I call this concept his contiguous line of thought, the WAY2B. In addition, his followers were known as people of the way. He promised fulfillment in a change for which 600 religious laws could only hope. One mid-century writer attributed this phrase to him 32 times. No other ancient writer used the phrase kingdom of heaven at all. The strongest evidence Jesus spoke of this change was this same writer's depiction of Jesus' 11 stories about his metaphorical kingdom of heaven. His followers asked him why he told so many stories. He said, "To you it has been granted to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been granted." Jesus simply used these symbolic stories to stimulate his listeners' minds. Here we only introduce them. We will consider each of them in greater detail in later videos. Jesus began these stories with a question, specifically referring to the kingdom of heaven. "To what may the kingdom of heaven be compared, or what is the kingdom of heaven like?" Jesus said. He said the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field. He spoke of sowing the WAY2B only to have others corrupt it. Jesus reportedly said the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. The way, a small idea, once planted can grow into a larger understanding. One begins least in the kingdom of heaven. Then their understanding grows and becomes great, benefiting many others around them. Jesus said perhaps the kingdom of heaven, the way, is like leaven. This small idea grows inside you until it becomes infectious. The speaker speaks of the kingdom of heaven like a treasure buried in a field, discovering something wonderful and committing yourself to it with all your being. Making the same point, the speaker said the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant seeking fine pearls. As with the hidden treasure, the kingdom of heaven, the way, is like a fine pearl, worth everything you have. Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is like a dragnet cast into the sea. Many get caught up in it, only some remain. The kingdom of heaven, the way, is like casting out an idea about life. Some continue in the way and some do not. In response to the question, how often should one forgive, the speaker said the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a certain king who wished to settle accounts. Perhaps the kingdom of heaven, the way, is compared to forgiving the accounts of others, to find only some learn from the experience enough to pay it forward. Again, speaking to its value, Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers. The kingdom of heaven, having this way about you, is like going to work early or late in the day. Everyone benefits equally, no matter how late in life they try. And still again, the speaker said the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding feast for his son. The kingdom of heaven, the way, is compared to an invitation, offering something beneficial to everyone, then discovering only some are ready and or willing. He said the kingdom of heaven will be comparable to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. Some prepared ahead of time, some procrastinated and had no oil. The kingdom of heaven, the way, prepares one for the day their visceral response is required of them. One last example. Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is just like a man about to go on a journey. He called his own servants and entrusted his possessions to them. He gave each of them different amounts. Some used their amounts for increase, one did not. Might it be that the kingdom of heaven, you having this way about you, is just like the story of the talents? If you learn the way required for a content life, you either use it or lose it. Whatever you might think of my interpretations, ask yourself if a wealthy beyond the clouds afterlife kingdom is present in any of Jesus' comparisons. Religion's current understanding of this wealthy afterlife came long after Jesus died, at the end of the 1st century, with the writing of an esoteric work of supernatural fiction, an ancient sci-fi, if you will. The speaker spoke of the kingdom of heaven, the way, using metaphors of people and things from everyday life, doing everyday stuff, and his stories illustrate the way to be and the resulting contentment the way brings. Now don't think that my purpose here is to tear down your hope in a supernatural afterlife. After pastoring 4 churches, I understand quite well the comfort brought by the anticipation of seeing your loved ones again. Instead, consider, if you will, a better way than religion, a way that makes your life simpler and fuller, a way to be content. The kingdom of heaven is no further than inside of you. It is not supernatural. There is a natural way of being that brings life. Whether you are atheist or theist or none of the above, your genuine desire to change yourself is all that is required. The burden of arguing over religion is off your shoulders. Get on with your life. This was Jesus' good tidings, his good news. All right. So, do we have any interaction? Anybody have anything they want to add to the picture? Carol says she's on, Colleen's on, Jan's on, and Carol's on. That's all good. All right, that's good. That's great. So basically what Sabotage was responding to was the idea that he needed to go out and make everyone on earth be happy with each other, and then we'd have heaven on earth. And that's not at all what Jesus said. What Jesus said was, your kingdom of heaven is inside you, and your kingdom of heaven is something that is your contentment. It's a place inside of you where whatever it is you call God dwells. And that contentment can come as the result of changing your attitude toward life. And then whatever goes on around you, whatever goes on in your circumstances, whatever goes on between people, whatever happens to finances, health, so forth, you can find that place of contentment and be back at peace. Jan writes, I think that without the supernatural stuff, we wouldn't have any dogma in the church. If we didn't have the dogma, would the church exist? And that's probably a pretty good question, because the people of the way that Jesus was teaching and that he had talked to, and they had become the following that was later taken over by the early church as it developed the Christian religion. First of all, those people of the way you wouldn't call Christians because there was no such word at the time, but they were known as people of the way, and the Bible reflects that. But those people of the way are still in existence today. The reason that you don't see them have banded together in clubs and groups and name themselves something and buy a clubhouse and so forth is because they don't need to. They don't need to at all. They don't need to be able to gain their peace from other people and to gain their recognition from other people and to gain their status and self-worth from other people. Instead, they are content within themselves. The person that I write about in the book, The WAY2B, Recovering from Too Much Religion, is not me. I wrestle with that whole picture a whole lot more so than Joni. But Joni is a person who I've been around for 45 years, and she comes nearer to having this way about her than most of the people I've ever met in my life. Now, I've met hundreds of people in my life that I think do have this way about them, but they don't have anything to prove. You can set them down anywhere, and they're comfortable in their own skin. And I think that the church probably would have a hard time existing. As a matter of fact, one day here in our private group, someone said, at least I don't think that the way would have been enough for them to form the Christian church off of. Instead, the way would have been too simple. It's just a matter of adjusting your inward attitude. But rather, what they needed was something to hang on to, and so walking on water and changing water into wine and supernatural events were far more appealing to them. But that was the nature of the culture in their day. The Old Testament authors had made heroes out of their leaders and out of their the people that they admired throughout history, and the Christians did the same. That as the Christian church developed, I could even say as we developed, because I still consider myself a Christian, but as we developed, we simply made out of our heroes and our leaders something supernatural, something beyond human, if you will. And I think that's the person who made that comment here in the private group might have been right, in that would they have attached themselves to the way? But there was a following before the Christian church ever began, before Paul ever wrote a letter. There was a following. Jesus had a following, and that following was the reason that he wound up getting killed, because he was saying you don't need the church. When we get into the subject, the section of the channel, the YouTube channel that we're developing, when we get into Woe to You Religion, and that chapter in my book actually talks about the fact that Jesus had a lot of very difficult things to say about religion, and that religion itself was in essence a problem. He had great criticism for the practice of religion. Colleen says, but we... Huh?
Got some chats to respond to.
I see that. Colleen says, I think that without the dogma, religions might behave better. And then she said, but we still need to look for similarities rather than harping on differences. And that's true. That's true. I have a great love for the church and Christian people. I was on staff at 5 churches, and I have a great love for Christian people. And I have no problem with the practice of religion. I don't even have a problem with the belief in the supernatural. I don't believe in the supernatural myself, but I don't have a problem with it. But the truth is that if religion is used to decide who the good people are and who the bad people are, if the religion is used to decide who you're better than, if religion decides is used in order to garner money and work out of people, by making them afraid not to, then that's wrong. It's wrong, and it's no part of the way. And that's what Jesus said. Jesus said you'd tear down a widow's house in order to make your long, lofty prayers. Jan writes, however, having said that, I do feel her ongoing presence in my life, which is a great comfort. And I say that all the time, that deep down within me, I know there's what I call theos. That way I can get away from the word God when I'm talking to people. But theos, it's just the Greek word for God. And so theos within me is that place I appeal to that helps me get beyond where I would normally want to go. Lets me get beyond the grief that pains me. Lets me overcome a problem that seems unsurmountable. Something is greater than me. And I feel that something greater than me, and I appeal to it. But I don't think that I can tell you about your theos or your God. I think each one of us have to deal with the subject in a personal way. And I think that's what the people of the Way were doing, and that's what Jesus' teachings lend itself to. It doesn't lend itself to a bunch of rules and regulations and dogma and liturgy and practice prayers and so forth. The Way is a matter of changed attitude within, and it makes you resilient. You know, at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, he said, those of you who can hear these words of mine are like the man who built his house upon the rock, and the winds came and the storm came and the winds blew and the house stood. But you that cannot internalize these teachings, you're like the man who built his house upon the sand, and the winds came and the storm came and the winds blew, and great was the fall of the house. And we just find that there are people in this life whose contentment is far more unshakable, far less shakeable than other people's. And the reason for that is because they're at peace within themselves. They've established a pattern within themselves. Let's see, Carol wrote, good video. Yes, I agree, the world would be a better place, but it's hard to imagine a world where no one believed in life after death. Well, of course, the reason that it's hard to imagine a world like that and is because, and I've had the same issue for years, and that is it's because from our birth, I was born into a family where I was on the cradle roll of a church. My grandfather started in his living room that grew to over 1,000 people, and it is hard to imagine because you have been told all your life just exactly how it is, and in many ways that afterlife is the carrot that you're the reward you're going to get for obeying the church when you get right down to it. And so some people believe in an afterlife, some people don't. I have no issue with anyone believing in an afterlife if it gives them comfort. And certainly this next video, I address it. The very first thing I address is, what about this matter of heaven? And we're going to watch that video here in a second. But we got a good conversation going on right now. Colleen wrote, Jan, I agree. My son David suddenly passed away a few months ago, and I feel his presence as well. And then Jan wrote, so how could religion coalesce around something without dogma? And Colleen said, thinking that helps me with grief. And Jan says, me too. And without question, and I'm going to address that. The first thing I talk about is doing funerals and so forth. And the fact is, the thought of an afterlife gives great comfort to people. And the thought, Joni has a take on, her mama died, she died when...
Recently.
No, not recently, but when our youngest son was a baby. Right after he was born, she died. And she and I talk about this all the time, that her presence is still there. And say it the way you say it, Joni.
For all of my life, Mother will be alive because she will be in my thoughts and in my methods, my protocols, my everything, because she's in my head. So she lives now through me and my sisters and brother. So as long as I live, Mother will be alive. And because of the way we pass our people on to our children, that remains true. Obviously, at some point that fades because they don't know or remember her as well as I do, or as well as our children do. So that does go away, but she lives for a lot longer than just her life.
Right. The other thing her mother used to say about her was that Joni was at peace within herself. I actually had a doctor one time who said Joni was the one person she had met in her life that was the most comfortable in her own skin of anyone she'd ever met. But her mom used to say Joni just took care of herself. She did not need a lot of tending to, because Joni was at peace within herself and could deal with herself. And I think a large amount of what happens when we are in grief and we do lose someone, I think a large amount of what happens has to do with how stable then are we. Do we have this way inside of us? And can we deal with what's happened? My mom died within a month after I got down here. and had to go back to Tennessee and see to the funeral. But you just don't know what is going to happen, and you don't know when it's going to happen. The question is, do you have the peace inside that Jesus talked about? And how is that peace developed? Jan said, life after death, what is it? Do we have the same body, or is it a spirit? And of course, I don't believe in life after death, but a lot of people believe that it's not a bodily life. A lot of people believe that there is no physical heaven, but rather it's their spirit, and there will be people that they whose presence they still perceive, and people who still perceive their presence after death in a spiritual world of some sort. There's all kinds of takes on the kingdom of heaven and on heaven itself. But Jesus's comments, all of his comments, the only time the words, the figure of speech, the kingdom of heaven were used when Jesus spoke them, or when the writer of the ancient work that the church later named Matthew, that writer used the phrase 32 times. He is the only writer that used it. And that's that kingdom of heaven, those stories that are told there, that definition of the kingdom of heaven, to what shall I compare it? What is it like? Has absolutely nothing to do with an afterlife. And that's more than abundantly obvious within the scripture. That that golden street, pearly gate afterlife is found in the book of Revelations 100 years after Jesus was born, 70 years after Jesus died. Let's see here. Colleen says, I totally agree, Joni. As long as our loved ones are remembered, they will be here. And that's absolutely the truth. I have a grandfather who I thought was one of the grandest people to ever live. And people say many people thought I was his child because I spent so much time with him. They had no idea that he was not my father. I don't know how they figured he pulled it off because he was a lot older than me. But nonetheless, there were people that thought I was, they used to think that my last name was Mingle instead of Elrod because his last name was Mingle. Jan says, Joni, those are good points. However, most people only can remember back 2, maybe 3 generations. Jan says, I'm going to 2 burials of my mother's bones. Yes, just the bones. She is not there, but her spirit lives on. And I do see what you're talking about. Joni says, very true. Maybe that's a tradition we need to start. Journaling for those who are ours. Let's see what Carol wrote. I say that no one knows. I don't believe in a heaven with pearly gates and golden streets. And of course, no one knows. But the only reason we think of it to decide that no one knows, you can't prove a negative. And so obviously, no one can prove. That's why I say that I don't know. I don't consider myself an atheist, but I do consider myself agnostic. But the fact is, no one does know. And you can't say for certain anything, and you certainly can't prove a negative. However, in the process, you need to understand that the reason that you think it's a positive, that is something that you do know or something that you might know, and someone else needs to prove you wrong, is because you were taught for years and years and years and years that something was so until you considered it knowledge. And so be careful with that, because you're trying to make someone prove to you that your indoctrination is incorrect. And no one can do that any more than someone can prove to me that my indoctrination is incorrect, because there is no evidence or physical proof of any kind to even talk about it. Let's see. Colleen wrote, yes, we have lost the art of oral and written histories, oral and written histories of families. So let's go to it's 5 minutes after 8. Let's go to the next video, and we'll continue this same conversation. But you all have brought up this business about heaven, so it's perfect. The video that I made for tonight is also only 7.5 minutes long, and that's my goal. 5 to 10 minutes from now on. No more of those long harangues like I did last Thursday night. I was sick of it by the time I got through saying it. So at any rate, let's watch one more video, and let's see if we can develop our thoughts a little bit further. But again, remember the question. The question is, if the major world religions had concentrated on the inward change in a person that they claim to be a part of their teachings, instead of making prominent the most important thing, the supernatural, would the world be a better place? And I mean, you know I have an obvious answer for that, but you may not. You may have a different answer. But that's the question. That's the question.
You need to look back through your chat because Jan answered the question.
Yeah, I saw
about
it.
17 minutes ago.
I saw it and I read it out loud. Yeah, I did.
Okay.
Jan, did I read it out loud or not? Let's see.
Mine says 17 minutes ago.
I read it out loud. I think without the supernatural stuff, we wouldn't have any dogma in the church. If we didn't have dogma, how could or would the church exist, right?
No, I didn't hear that before, but okay.
Well, that's one I read. Okay. So anyway, we're gonna watch this video. Jan says, Carol, I agree with you. Of course, you can read. Y'all are both on chat. I think we humans, Colleen says, like to think our loved ones and self will live on somehow. And I think that's true. That is the number one thing. And like I said at the very beginning of this next video, I talk about that. Is that one of the great comforts? Probably the big deal is not missing out on the golden streets or the pearly gates or being wealthy. The big deal is whether or not we'll see our loved ones after we die. And that's the big deal for all of us, for everybody. They're not so much worried about getting rich as they are worried about whether or not they will see mama and daddy and their brothers and sisters or whoever it is they love. So let's move on with the next video then. Well, it's not working. Expressing surprise and delight, one might say, heavens to Betsy, I'm in hog heaven now. The word heaven is thrown around carelessly throughout life. That is until we lose a loved one. Serving religion taught me the cathartic effect of the prevailing view of the kingdom of heaven. This is especially so when conducting funerals and while caring for family and friends. The thought of an eternal place with no more suffering and much wealth, where we join our loved ones again, is a source of great comfort. The kingdom of heaven is therefore an especially delicate subject for the religious. Even so, Jesus saw the kingdom of heaven very differently than we do today. The modern rendition of a magic kingdom with streets of gold did not arrive on the scene until the end of the 1st century, long after Jesus died. Then what about Jesus' kingdom? Where is it? According to an ancient writer, he opened the famous speech known as the Sermon on the Mount with "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And this same writer depicts in Jesus' diatribe concerning religious leaders, "You shut off the kingdom of heaven from others, for you do not enter in yourselves." We begin with the kingdom of heaven, even though it is the most sensitive subject. However, without an understanding of Jesus' kingdom of heaven, not a supernatural concept at all, we cannot see clearly into the ancient writer's other two primary offerings I call Woe to You religion and the WAY2B recovering from too much religion. Again, where is this kingdom? Do we go there when we pass away? Is our security found in some wealthy hereafter? Jesus located the kingdom of heaven in a very different place than our religious roots taught us. Yet Jesus' kingdom of heaven is a far superior source of comfort. The two words, kingdom and heaven, were simply used by Jesus to form a figure of speech, kingdom of heaven. The root for heaven in ancient Greek refers to sky or air, like the heavens above us. Jesus' target audiences were familiar with ancient Hebrew religious writings. For them, God in heaven and God of heaven were common phrases. The Hebrew word for heaven also means sky or air. This same precept was used in a metaphorical sense to refer to where God dwells and the great unknown reaches of up above, God Most High. For Jesus' listeners, God was somewhere beyond the clouds or stars, in the heavens, in a heavenly place, up in heaven. Jesus' society used the word heaven or heavens to refer to the vast expanse of sky or air, and as a metaphor for the vastness of the not fully understood, like where God is. Likewise, the adjective heavenly appears to be a descriptive word for that which is ethereal and vastly good, primarily Heavenly Father, but also heavenly host and heavenly things. Just as we have many uses for the same word, ancient journalists also used the word heaven without kingdom to communicate many different meanings. For instance, glorify God who is in heaven refers to the unknown place where his listeners believe God dwells. Where Jesus said, lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, he was likely speaking to his figure of speech, kingdom of heaven. In a similar way, heaven and earth will pass away refers to the earth and sky. The other half of Jesus' figure of speech is kingdom. Society's idea of kingdom was steeped in history. Jesus' primary listeners shared a violent heritage. They understood kingdom, even hoped for a stable one of their own. Their kingdom had been destroyed many times. They told stories of ancestors who lived as slaves after being defeated by other kingdoms. They dreamed of an earthly kingdom, one that would never again be destroyed. Jesus' listeners were waiting on a deliverer who would eventually help them reverse their traditional roles as oppressed people. They dreamed of swapping places with their abusers. They would be rich on earth. Their enemies would become slaves and later experience a place called Sheol, on a bed of maggots covered by a blanket of worms. As with the word heaven, when Jesus used kingdom without heaven, there were many different uses. He may have been referring to his figure of speech, kingdom of heaven, or to any kingdom, or perhaps to the wealthy kingdom for which his listeners hoped. When Jesus spoke of the gospel of the kingdom, he was speaking of his figure of speech. When he said a kingdom is divided against itself, he was referring metaphorically to any and every kingdom. Again, when Jesus put these two words together, they formed his figure of speech, kingdom of heaven. He utilized this figure of speech to address the ongoing discontent among his listeners. He simply used terminology familiar to them. This figure of speech helped his listeners solve their discontent by locating their kingdom in a place they had not yet considered, within themselves. People of the way, as they were called in Jesus' day, were building their character and integrity. When and where is this kingdom of heaven? It is always now, and it's inside you. It's the natural way of being that makes one content. There is nothing supernatural about it. There is no religion to do, no magic kingdom to go to. Instead, the kingdom of heaven is a way to be. So if I repeat Jesus' parables concerning the kingdom of heaven as quickly as possible, they might sound like this. The kingdom of heaven is the good seed that gets corrupted. The kingdom of heaven is the mustard seed that grows to benefit others. The kingdom of heaven is the leaven inside that infects one's whole being. The kingdom of heaven is the treasure and the fine pearl that is more valuable than everything else. The kingdom of heaven is the dragnet in which some are kept and some are not. The kingdom of heaven is forgiving the accounts of others. The kingdom of heaven is one who comes early or late and still benefits the same. The kingdom of heaven is an invitation some reject, but others, of all kinds, accept. The kingdom of heaven prepares one for the day one's visceral response is required of them. And the kingdom of heaven is of varying value to each person, something one either uses or loses. I would ask the theist to consider that every supernatural aspect of Jesus was embellishment by ancient writers, overeager to build a religion long after Jesus died. I would ask the atheist, then, why his following grew even before he died, as they became known as people of the way. Could it be the kingdom of heaven is always at hand, even today? could it be that both atheist and theist alike would be more content if they had this way about them? Depending on your answers, you might just wind up saying, "Heavens to Betsy, I'm in hog heaven now." All right. So, heavens to Betsy, I'm in hog heaven now. I really believe that Jesus was teaching a way of contentment. Because in each one of those stories, there simply is not even an inference of the kingdom of heaven. And yes, it is true that over the millenniums, religion has tried to kind of trail those stories into the back door of some kind of, it's who gets in, and it's about whether you're saved early in life or late in life, you go to heaven anyway, and things like that. But if you look at it hard and you go through the scripture, and this is one of the things that I want you to stick with me on, it's going to take some time, but as we go through it, what you'll see is that this concept of the kingdom of heaven, usually I teach it last. I'm teaching it first this time. And the reason I'm teaching it first this time is because you cannot see the consistency in WAY2B religion, or woe to you religion, and also in the WAY2B itself, the Sermon on the Mount. You cannot, unless you understand the concept of the kingdom of heaven, because he uses that word, that phrase, the kingdom of heaven, within those teachings on religion itself and on the WAY2B, the Sermon on the Mount. So it's really, really important. But in so doing, he basically is saying, your kingdom is now. You know, they thought that their kingdom was going to come. There was no concept of this afterlife at the first place when Jesus was teaching. They thought their kingdom was going to come on earth. The Messiah was going to come. They were going to reign. Their oppressors were going to become their slaves. And they were going to be rich. And they were going to rule and sit at the table with Jacob and Isaac and so forth. In other words, this was a situation where God was going to reverse the roles on earth, and they were going to have a stable kingdom, and the people who had beat up on them all those years were going to wind up serving them as slaves. And so it's just a whole different concept. At no time does Jesus talk about this afterlife kingdom of heaven. And so where that all comes from is in Revelations. And Revelations is what has made this whole concept of what I call in the book a post-mortem Social Security. And that is, if you walk the walk and talk the talk, and you're a good Christian church member and so forth, then one day you'll die and you'll win the lottery and you'll go to heaven. And that's simply not what Jesus taught at all. Jan wrote, let's see here. There's a lot of stuff written here. Colleen wrote, I look forward to it every Thursday. Me too, Colleen. If we are happy with our lives, behave with good intent always to others, we are in the kingdom. I agree with that, Colleen. That's what he's talking about. The kingdom of heaven. The kingdom is within you and you're within the kingdom. Jan says, if your question mostly about Christianity, there has always been some type of God worship. That's absolutely true. Probably always will be. I don't think religion is going away. She says, Jan says, I like to think that we probably could, not necessarily would, have a better world if religion had not morphed into what it is today. And that's absolutely true. I don't think people of the first century would recognize what we're doing today. But I've heard that argument before, and I'll say this. And Colleen says, I agree with Jan. They are bloated
corpses, I think.
Did you mean corpses? I guess you did. They are bloated corpses now, or as Jesus said, on the outside you look like whitewashed tombs, but on the inside you're dead men's bones. If you take the same concept, you really don't have to. The morphing has occurred for millenniums, that's true. But think about it. If you went back to 1950, 1951 is when I was born. Now, if you went back to 1950, would the people who were in the church in 1950 have an issue with the way things are in the church now in 2015? And you know the obvious answer to that. They would be shocked. They'd be out of their minds. Corporations, Colleen said. And that's what I thought you said. They are corporations. Yeah, they're money-making industries. They are machines.
Yes,
But
they are.
But at any rate, I was teaching my group at Galton Road Baptist Church one time. I'll tell you this story really quickly because we got to finish up here. Well, we've got about 10 minutes. This has been a good night. I really appreciate all this activity on the chat room. But I was teaching my group on a Wednesday night at Galton Road Baptist Church in Nashville, Tennessee. And I asked them the question. I said, I was born in 1951, and this church was founded in 1951. In 1951, when you all and the charter members are sitting there, they're in their 70s, that kind of thing at the time. This is back in the late 90s when I pastored that church. And I said, in 1951, when this church was founded, would a woman have been able to get up and read scripture? No, no way. I said, in 1951, would a black person, an African American person, be able to come in here and just sit down in 1951? Would it have caused a disturbance? Well, yes, it would have caused a disturbance. And I said, in 1951, would a divorced person been able to teach a Sunday school class or serve, even in the choir or whatever? No, probably not. Probably not. I said, well, I want to ask you something. Have the changes since 1951 until now, have they been for the better or for the worse? And they all agreed. Oh, that's been for the better. It's been for the better. I said, so what makes you think, because this was about 1998, 99, somewhere in there, maybe 2000 at the latest. That's the first church I pastored right after seminary. But at any rate, I said, okay, let me ask you a question. What makes you think 50 years from now, you won't be saying to yourself what our thoughts were and what our words were and what our attitudes were toward gay people, toward same-sex couples? What makes you think that 50 years from now you won't look back at that and be appalled? So time changes everything. And so I do know that the church today is something that even 50 years ago no one could imagine, much less 2,000 years ago. But even I think that given what Jesus taught the people of the way, given what they were doing, and the fact that it got him killed, religion got so uncomfortable that they convinced the Roman government to execute him, as the Bible even refers to such. That the Pharisees and scribes convinced the crowd to ask for his crucifixion. But I don't think that Jesus and his crowd, the people of the way, I don't think they would have recognized the church in the first century that developed 60, 70 years after Jesus died. Because we wouldn't in 1951, if you were old enough to remember in 1951, you would have been appalled in 1951 at the whole notion of what the church is like today, and all the intermingling of different ethnicities, and all of the different things that women can do they couldn't do before, and all of the different kinds of couples there are today, and all of the single mothers, and all of the divorces, and so forth. You just couldn't imagine it, and you would think you would be horrified at the whole thought. So, yeah, I think the church has morphed, but I think it started morphing. It started morphing into what it is today. The first day that Paul dictated a letter. Okay, I really do. I think it's been going on ever since. Jan said, so what has occurred to open people's minds to other biblical interpretations? Science.
Life.
Science and life. Yeah, life is a good answer, Johnny. Science and life. But today we know so much, and what has happened to us is, especially because of science, is there certain things that science now knows today that is almost a foregone conclusion. It's just almost knowledge. Science will never say anything, but this is the state of the science. Science will never claim to be a Gnostic, an all-knowing, I know the absolute truth. Only Baptist preachers and Pentecostal preachers do that. They know the absolute truth. But
no deacons.
And deacons, yeah. But no scientist will ever do that. But science has gone so far as to this current knowledge that we have concerning the development of humankind and evolution and the universe and so forth, make some of what people have believed about biblical interpretations of the world and how it developed and how it was born and all that kind of stuff, virtually one or the other is impossible. They're mutually exclusive alternatives of the same thing. And the religious part is purely speculation, and the science part is based on evidence. And we who love the Bible and love the words of Jesus and following Jesus, we need to understand that and quit holding on to those things that won't allow people to even see. Right now, I read some mail last week, if you'll remember. Right now, what people think that Jesus was an ogre and he was a horrible man and he taught horrible things and he led people in a horrible direction. That's how they think of him. But it's because now they've been indoctrinated by the fact that people have walked away from the church. They're mad at the church. And the whole idea of God, Jesus, or anything else is totally distasteful to them. And that's important. So we need to understand that. We're digging our own grave with this stuff. I think information is more readily available for people to access and think, which is absolutely true. Think about it. And Jan wrote that. And Colleen writes, yes, needing to think, not just go blindly on. And Jan said, and science can explain some, if not all, of the supernatural stuff. Right. They can explain that it didn't happen, or they can explain. I used to know all the scientific origins of each one of the plagues, from Pharaoh not wanting to let the slaves, the Israel slaves, go from Egypt in the Exodus. But using science for that purpose is really not, in my opinion, the best approach. The best approach is to understand that people wrote mythical stories. They wrote stories that were trying to communicate something and accomplish something that they had in mind. And that was the order of the day. That's how people operated. And there's nothing wrong with that. They weren't being evil. They weren't trying to do anything bad. But when somebody tries to convince you of a talking snake and a magic apple, you might want to say, okay, that's a story that tells us about the struggle between good and evil that has always been around, related to mankind. And I believe that. And I believe they were trying to communicate that human beings have always gotten themselves in trouble, and human beings have always had trouble being in the way, if you will. And I think that there's nothing wrong with those stories. They're beautiful stories, they're wonderful stories, but they are stories. They're not history. And so I think that's important. And we don't need to go on doing that which buries anything that's left of people knowing something about the wonderful things that Jesus taught and the wonderful things that he had to say. Jan says, and that's it, already read that, about the supernatural stuff. Well,
I think the fact that we use so much science fiction and we use so much ethereal garbage in television and for entertainment nowadays, it almost seems like the stuff that you read about in the Bible was tame, but it also puts a new light on it and shows that that's just as supernatural, just as not possible.
Right. Right, and we live in a different age, and we're learning more all the time, and we're accelerating. Right now, the acceleration of knowledge is such that we can't even imagine. I don't think we can even imagine 30 or 40 years from now. It is so amazing what's happening. Well, I'm sitting here talking to you all wherever you are in Tennessee and Georgia and so forth. And can you imagine in 1951 thinking I could sit in my living room and talk to all of you all? like this, it just seems impossible. So we have learned so much that it just has changed what is plausible related to a lot of the supernatural things. And I don't think we lose. I really don't think that we lose at all, but rather the question still remains. And we're going to get to the question here. The question still remains, and that is that let me get down to the question. I want to read it just like I had it. If each major religion over the millenniums had made primary its own teachings on the development of inward character instead of focusing on the supernatural things, would the world be a better place? And I know I've come back to that question over and over, but to me that is the most important question, in that if we are willing to go forward and to say that what Jesus taught is timeless, and it doesn't have to be proven by supernatural events or natural events 2,000 years ago. But this whole thing, when we get to the WAY2B, when we get to the Sermon on the Mount, you'll see what I mean. It is absolutely beautiful. And what's beautiful about it is that if you internalize this way, the way that the people of the way internalized it, hearing it from Jesus, it will absolutely change your life in a way that is more powerful than any promise of golden streets and pearly gates. It's something that the world needs. People are living in a state of discontent today, and that's fairly easy to see. And you root hog and die your way through life, and you break down doors, and you try to prove to yourself that you're constantly trying to live up to something. You want to be admired all the time, and so forth. And you're trying to be keeping up with the neighbors and who's got the best house, and and do we look good? And so many of us look great. We just look fabulous, and we're up to debt up to our eyeballs, and are miserable and worry and suffer from that pursuit. And yet Jesus had the solution to it. And so I stick with me. When we go through the woe to you religion, what Jesus had to say specifically about the practice of religion, and then what he had to say about the WAY2B itself, which is where I normally start. It is just absolutely beautiful, and it has convinced me altogether. The whole thing came upon me while I was in seminary, learning Greek and Hebrew, and studying the Bible with a great earnest, and learning the history of how the church came together, how the New Testament was developed, who the writers might have been, the fact that they were educated Greek-speaking, Greek-writing individuals. They were not Jesus's running buddies. They weren't Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, for instance, because Jesus and his buddies and his running buddies, his disciples and his followers were Palestinians who spoke Aramaic. They were not Greek-speaking people, and they were uneducated and poor. They could not write at all, most likely. And so the idea that John, that was written nearly to the end of the first century, was somehow written by the John that Jesus knew. In other words, the church later put Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John on those books. Do not identify the writers. They have no titles. And the church literally just decided what to name them. And we'll get to that at some point. We're going to go through the development of the New Testament in the first century at some point as a part of this study. Let's see what we got. Of course, Jan said, and science can explain some, if not all, of the supernatural stuff. I'm not sure what Colleen is saying. Yes, I think we would too. I don't see the rest of that. But it is already, we're 4 minutes late, which is fantastic. I really appreciate you guys all being here tonight. Joni, you got any parting words?
Not a one.
Not a one. I appreciate you talking tonight. If you all would let me know in the chat room. I'm going to go ahead and send it to the credits and close out the program. But if you all would let me know in the chat room before you get off whether or not Joni's sound was okay, if it was clear and you could hear it. because that's really, really important to me. Joni said, time to go. Colleen says, to answer your initial question. I'm not sure what she means by that. She wants me to answer.
That it would be a better world.
I think it absolutely would be a better world. If we lived a wonderful life in this world in which we hadn't created all the mess that we've created, we definitely would benefit greatly. Instead of hoping... Excuse me?
It would almost have to be less wars.
Yeah. Oh, she said I could hear Joni fine. The sound was good. Thanks. That's good. I'm glad. You would not believe. I'll let you know sometime, Jan, what we did to make all this work out. But seriously, we are using 3 different services right now. All of them are free, thank heaven. But one of them is not free. But one of them we have anyway. It's our telephone. But we're using 3 different services from 3 different companies to cause this image and sound to come together, so Joni doesn't have feedback between here and Tennessee. We have not been able to get, this is the first week we've been able to get this to work out. Colleen says, I could hear Joni very well, but at times her sound was a bit staticky. Yeah, that's probably because of the phone, but I don't know what we can do about that right now. Carol said it was fine. And she put in parentheses Joni. So I really do appreciate all the help tonight. I was sitting here and no one had logged on right at time. And I was thinking, you know what, Joni? You and I are fixing to talk to ourselves for an hour.
Well, we've done that plenty of times before.
Yeah, we do that every day. The drive time for work with Joni, she and I get on the phone. We have matching headsets, and we get on the phone and we talk every day for almost an hour. So, Colleen says, sorry, autocorrect hates me. No, autocorrect doesn't hate you. It hates us all. So. At any rate, let me send y'all to the credits, and thank you so much for being here tonight. And I'll get the newsletter out again to you this next week, and I look forward to seeing those of you who are in the private group on Sunday. Thank you very much. Bye.